morning, everyone, and welcome back to Wake and Take. It's your boy Jason, and we've got some football to talk about today. And today's a very special episode. It won't just be me yapping this morning. We've actually stumbled across podcast episode 200 of this year. Just this year alone. We're probably over who knows how many episodes now. But for this very special episode, I had to bring the GOAT out here, the OG himself, Theo Gremminger, will be joining me today to break down everything you need to know to win your league. So go ahead, take out your coffee, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. I'm in, Theo. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Big shout out to Jason. Everybody, I hope you're supporting the show. I know you have a lot of loyalists, Jason, but 200 episodes this year, that's ridiculous. And you're keeping it relevant. You're gaining your audience. So big shout out to you. Really happy to be here. Happy to be here before the fantasy playoffs, and happy to get that stink of Thursday night off. That was just the most tilting start to the fantasy playoffs in quite some time. It was a game that we thought was going to pop off, go over. Just had the 44-point game from the LA Rams, and instead we get no touchdowns last night. So shout out to everybody who survives that one and wins this week.
I don't think that was there a football game last night, Theo? I don't know.
I mean, it was really, really, really bad. I guess if you started Jake Moody, you're okay this morning. Puka Nacua, and Kyron Williams both had some counting stats, but obviously no touchdowns. And those are guys that you're kind of counting on to give you those big scores. So a lot of tilted fantasy managers. And if you went up against a Brock Purdy team, you're chilling this week. That's you're probably in good shape. Avoided smash performances from everybody. Very, very tilting. And we usually think about big performances, but it's these sometimes negative performances, sometimes small performances. I mean, everything about it was tilting. And Jason, a weather game on the West Coast. We got to worry about weather. We're talking about weather. We should be talking about Buffalo this weekend or something like that. Not what's going on in California.
Yeah, it's the weirdest game ever. I do have a question for you. What do you think was more tilting, Cooper Kupp or Deebo Samuel last night?
Well, I think it was absolutely Cooper Kupp, because I think Deebo Samuel was really out of a lot of lineups.
Fair.
And Deebo now, it's shout out to Dan Williamson, good friend of mine. We split some teams together. I hope you guys are supporting the Fantasy Empire. Great show right here on Player Profiler, YouTube and podcasts. But Dan and I was talking to Dan about a couple start-sit decisions, and I was talking to two of the Fantasy Point guys, Brett Whitefield and Scott Barrett, who I do a show with Scott now. And it's I'm I can't start Deebo. There's no way. And I'm going through the skankiest start-sit decisions with my Deebo exposure. And it's so funny, Jason, beginning of the year, Deebo was a guy that was super exciting, puts up all these big performances, but father time, and he's also beat up. It's no good. Deebo was not in any of my lineups last night, thankfully. But this is a guy where you just can't start Deebo anymore. It's every game has been single-digit points. He's had one game where it was double-digit points, and it was 12. So the only one who wanted me to start Deebo, shout out to Billy Muzio, who will tell you to start a San Francisco 49er any chance he has. So there you go, Billy.
I am supremely disappointed because Deebo Samuel's probably just my favorite football player, at least prime Deebo Samuel from a couple years ago. He's just, he's just such a unique player with such a fun play style. He plays angry. He runs into contact. We love that.
Yeah.
And I woke up this morning and, look over at my team that does have Deebo, and obviously it's a consolation bracket team because I have Deebo, and I got 12 points, and I was like, that's not too bad. And then I was like, oh, he's also just getting all the kick return yards now too. It's just awful. He's not doing anything.
No, nothing. Yeah. So that'll be an interesting one. I imagine that they'll probably part ways this offseason. There's also a chance that Deebo restructures everything and just wants to stay with the 49ers. Mm-hmm. But I think next year will be interesting because you get Ayuk back. Jennings has taken this massive step forward, and Ricky Pearsall. So they've built themselves for this in the long term, but it's still kind of sad to see these guys not deliver when we're so used to it this time of year.
For sure. Worst time of the year for this to happen. I will say, to your point, I feel like we kind of had the same thing last year where Stephon Diggs, like how he kind of ended the year really slowly after starting off a lot better. And he was able, the Bills were able to offload him for a decent draft capital, even with that slow end of the year. So I know that I've been seeing a lot of people saying that that's not possible for Debo with how poorly he's playing. I don't necessarily think that's the case. I'm sure there's still one team out there that wouldn't mind paying up. So I don't want to close that book. It's still possible that he ends up somewhere else, and becoming more and more likely he is back in San Francisco, though, is what it's looking like.
Yeah.
So that was last night's game, I guess, question mark. We did have a big piece of news this morning. I guess not as much anymore, but Odell Beckham was officially released by the Miami Dolphins. Sure.
I mean, yeah, there you go. It's been, peak Odell was lit.
Yeah.
Older Odell has been, really nothing. We had that nice stretch with the Rams where he played some pretty strong fantasy football.
Yeah.
Cleveland, he had the one season, but it's been sort of like, let's get hyped and think it's going to be New York Odell. So yeah, Odell, you were really, really fun to watch for a while.
That's the best way to put it. He had a really great catch. It was pretty cool. I liked it when you punched the kicking net and the whole boat incident. We had great stories from you, Odell.
Rookie year Odell, if you had him on a roster, was about as good a draft pick as you ever could make at the wide receiver position. It was like him and peak Josh Gordon and like Puka Nacua last year were like the three best values ever at wide receiver.
Yeah. Those were all like kind of waiver wires too at some point too. I remember picking him up that year. It was amazing. I was like, oh, then you win it. If you picked up Odell, you won that year.
You're done.
So shout out Odell. Now, lastly, before we get into the actual content of today, important, especially this time of year, is just all the injuries piling up. So I'm just going to read some of the players that have not been practicing, and you can kind of latch on to hear if anyone really stands out to you. But both the Bears running backs, Swift and Roschon, are not practicing. With Swift, I do know that this has kind of been the trend for the last couple of weeks, and he still does end up active on game day. So I think we're still kind of hopeful there. But unfortunately, David Njoku is not practicing, trending towards not playing. Kind of the same thing here with Evan Ingram. So two huge tight ends looking like they're probably going to be out here in the fantasy playoffs. Alvin Kamara not practicing, but it's with an illness. So I would assume he's going to be okay for the game. Yesterday in the comments, Harry Snowman said he's just sick of practicing. And I think that's a really good way to put it.
Kamara's an interesting one, though, because I think people need to temper their expectations no matter what. He's already being challenged by the quality of the offense, but last week he had one of his lowest snap shares of the season, and it was with Kendre Miller getting additional work. So and we have also seen Kamara hasn't had like that big fantasy performance since week 6. That Carolina game was like week 7, week 8, and he had this massive week. It was like a 28-pointer. But ever since then, it's been solid, but not like hugely impactful numbers. So I think he's already sort of trending down a little bit in terms of like earlier in the year, he's a top 5 back. Maybe he's like a low end RB1 this week. High end RB2, I think, should be the expectations.
I think that's fair. He's at least still going to catch some passes. It is definitely concerning, though. Derek Carr officially not playing, or at the very least, Jake Haener is officially starting. And that's just going to kind of be painful, especially like you said, with Kendre Miller stepping up a little bit last week. In New York, Drew Lock is not expected to play either. So they've already announced that Tommy DeVito will be out there. Breece Hall as well on the other side of New York, not looking like he's going to be able to play, looking like we're going to get some more Braylon Allen, Isaiah Davis action. George Pickens looking like he's going to miss another week with his hamstring injury. Kenneth Walker looking like he's going to miss another week. We might get another Zach Charbonnet explosion. And then Tampa is very interesting. There's actually 3 big players, and I want to kind of latch onto this because it's Mike Evans, Bucky Irving, and Sterling Shepard. And we've kind of seen this before where when all these players are injured in Tampa, Cade Otton is able to step up, which I think is massive for the David Njoku, Evan Ingram teams in particular. But also this means that the teams that have been unfortunately holding on to Rachaad White all season kind of get an extra boost here in week 15 as well. So I think that that's something important to look at. And then Jalen McMillan, he had 2 touchdowns last week. Are you buying back into him?
Jalen McMillan, I wouldn't necessarily want to have him in my lineup. But again, if Mike Evans somehow misses, and people will like brush off what you said about Sterling Shepard, but Sterling Shepard has really had very strong usage. So if that usage goes to McMillan, he becomes interesting. agreed with Kate Otten. It's also just not the best matchup against an LA Chargers defense that's been, really stout.
Yeah.
But for me, like I talked about this on another show earlier this week that, I've been all about Bucky Irving all season long. Yeah. But if Bucky misses, Liam Cohen has been like one of the best offensive coordinators for getting running back production. Rachaad White has 5 touchdown catches on the year, trails only Devon Achane. And we saw Sean Tucker last week when Bucky went out. Tucker only got like 3 carries. So I think this could end up being a very strong Rachaad White week. This could be like salvation for the Rachaad White managers, where they might end up getting like a 20-point game in week 15 when he was sort of left for dead after Tampa Bay's bye week with Bucky. So Rachaad White will catch some passes against the Chargers. He's a threat to score on a receiving touchdown. Everything sort of trends up if there's multiple players missing around him. So Bucky's the man. Bucky is like that. Bucky's going to be a guy we're taking in the 3rd round next year. But Rachaad White can have a really strong end to the season. He's still, by all accounts, a very good receiver, and the coaching staff still really likes him. So this could be a Rachaad White week.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting stuff. Even it's really like Tampa is a really good team. They never cease to amaze me, but especially this season, just the way that Baker Mayfield has continued to fight with all these injuries piling up, losing Dave Canales. Like it really is. It's just
Liam Cohen's going to be a head coach in this league too. I think he deserves a lot of credit. To think about what he was able to accomplish all those weeks without Godwin and Evans, where, like you said, like he was getting the most out of guys like Kate Otten, using Rachaad White and Bucky Irving in the same games. Like, I love seeing these offensive coordinators who can adjust and things don't just crumble when they're missing guys. I think Liam Cohen's like a really, really sharp OC and a guy that I think we'll see as an NFL head coach. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets some interviews down this coming offseason.
Yeah, definitely going to be one of the names out there, especially depending on if Ben Johnson decides to stay in Detroit or not.
Ben Johnson's gone. I don't buy into any of that stuff. I think Ben Johnson might take that Jacksonville job. I think we would pay him a fortune. It's sort of a low bar standard to accomplish. And I think that could happen. Ben Johnson, I think, will get attention from every opening, but don't be surprised if it's Jacksonville. There's some steam there.
You want the quarterback, right? And I know that there's a lot of discourse out there about Trevor Lawrence, but I think a head coach, or at least a head coach candidate, doesn't think that way. They don't worry about the Bears. So.
No, I think Ben Johnson's gone. I think both of those coordinators for Detroit are going to get head coaching jobs. I think Aaron Glenn's going to get a coaching job too, based on, he's a guy that I think NFL teams really, really like. And he's a guy that's showed that he can sort of overcome losing a superstar and still have his team playing very, very competitive. So I think it's going to be like the Detroit Lions lose both OC and DC this offseason.
That'll be interesting to watch. Hopefully they win the Super Bowl before that happens.
I mean, we're rooting for them. We were together in Detroit for the NFL draft, and there was already like an energy in the air with every like local person you talk to, how hyped. They just had the Michigan National Championship, and they were like on to the Lions for the following year. And it's an easy team to root for. I've been Team Dan Campbell for years. That's a guy that is a proven winner in this league. And Jason, a lot of times we see this where a team takes a step forward in the playoffs after losing a close one the year before. Mm-hmm. Philly's a tough one, but I think that besides Philly, I think Detroit is in good shape despite all the defensive losses to make that run. Hard to see them losing at home.
Yeah, exactly. If they lock down that home, I think it's going to be very difficult. And you mentioned Philadelphia. They're just kind of one of those teams that their energy, their confidence level affects their play so much. Like you can catch them on a bad day. For some reason, they're either amazing or pretty bad. And I feel like going into Detroit, I think that would be a good one for the Lions to win. Now,
I see a question quickly in your chat from Chev. Alvin Kamara or Zach Charbonnet? If Ken Walker's out again, it's Zach Charbonnet all day. 27 points per game. It is 3 starts over like 85% snap share. Zach Charbonnet is awesome. Charbonnet's got 8 touchdowns on the season too. Like Charbonnet, if he gets that start, Charbonnet's up there. Charbonnet and Walker have the same amount of touchdowns on the season with 8 on a far fewer touches. So Charbonnet, 7 receptions last week. Everything about him screams upside this week, and he's so productive in that offense when Ken Walker's out.
Yeah. Yeah. I do still think when Kenneth Walker comes back, that Zach Charbonnet does go down a lot, but it's just not. That's why we roster handcuffs, right? That's why that's all you do. That's the strategy. Put those backups on your bench. They'll step up. I guess lastly, David also has a question around these same players regarding the injuries. It's Rachaad White or the Jets running backs. I think obviously if there's no Bucky, you've got to go with Rachaad.
Yeah, I think that's the case. And I think if Bucky plays, that's a difficult one. It's a great matchup for both of those Jets running backs. Like if you're in a jam this week, both of those guys are on the flex radar, even if Breece Hall sits. Jacksonville has just been gashed by opposing running backs, by opposing everything. And this is one where they had like split usage, but they're both getting targets. Yeah. Davis has had the touchdowns over the last 2 weeks, but we're big Braylon Allen fans, but I think both can be used in the flex, or if you're in like a jam at the RB2 spot, and just hope something shifts to one and one of them gets 65% of the production. And I think that's going to be good enough to get you in the week.
For sure. For sure. The last injury I want to talk about before we get into the topic of today is Tony Pollard not practicing. We haven't really seen what Tyjae Spears would look like with the full backfield. If there's no Pollard, are you locked in on Tyjae Spears, or is this Titans offense just so bad you can't do it?
I really wouldn't want to trust the Titans offense without Pollard. Pollard's been a really big part of that team. I don't know. I don't know if this new coaching staff likes Tyjae as much as they sort of said in the preseason. Everything has sort of shifted to Pollard. I wouldn't be surprised if they add another running back this coming offseason. That Tyjae was not their guy. And this is one where there'll be a lot of pressure on Callahan. It's a very deep running back class upcoming. Don't be surprised. So for me, I think that Calvin Ridley is the one that you can use from Tennessee this week. If you're really trying to chase a Titan, because the way that the Bengals games go, usually an opposing pass catcher becomes viable. But for me, I trend everything down if Pollard's unable to play. And if Pollard, even if he is able to play, they're like 5-point dogs to Cincinnati. I didn't look at the lines this morning, but I think that's about the line. If anybody has the current line, put it in the chat.
It was 5.5.
Yeah, so this is one where everything sort of, I think this is going to be Cincinnati sort of name your score type game against their former OC, Brian Callahan.
That's exactly what I think. I said like sit Will Levis yesterday. I mean, I know that's tough.
Sit Will Levis, Jason. That was very brave of you.
I know, so brave, so bold. Yeah. But I was like, I just don't. I know that every quarterback ends up in a shootout. I just think that with Callahan and just how horrible he looked against that Jaguars defense, I just can't do it. Just can't. Now, before we get into the topic, I do want to play a quick ad break. Everyone, Fast Draft is killing it in the DFS scene. Go try the Flex 6 Frenzy. The Podfather has more about that.
Oh, incredible news about Fast Draft. Fast Draft DFS is live. It's called the Flex 6 Frenzy. You just draft 6 guys, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends for the Sunday slate. You like Jahmyr Gibbs? You like Jackson Smith and Jigba? You like Tyrone Tracy? Draft him. And the beauty is you can just order 5 teams, submit your rankings, and Fast Draft will email you the results. We awarded $1,000 in prizes our first week, and we're just going up from there. Soon it's going to be a select 6. No drafting at all. You just pick any 6 guys. Our DFS mantra, just say no to salaries on Fast Draft. Don't forget there's free tools on Fast Draft too. You want to get ready for startup season? We've created the best Dynasty mock draft experience there is. And if you want to play in these DFS contests, and our best ball contest for 2025 are coming very soon too, just use promo code PODFATHER when you deposit and you get a free draft. It's that easy. And you're like, oh, I already have Fast Draft. Great. Refer a friend. Have them put your username in as the promo code, and then you and your friend will both get an instant deposit match up to $25. We got DFS. We got Dynasty Mocks. We got Best Ball. It's all there for you on fastdraft.app. Check it out. And the promo code is PODFATHER.
Welcome back to Wake and Take with Jason and Theo. You can use promo code PODFATHER, or you could also use promo code Jason, or today, our special guest, promo code Theo on Fast Draft as well. Your first deposit match is actually up to $25, which lets you get max entries into that Flex 6 Frenzy tournament. Can't recommend it enough. Go start drafting faster. Theo, we are here, week 15, of course, heading into the fantasy playoffs, and I want to talk league winners and league losers. Let's take a look back at the season, have some thoughts on some players. We'll start, what to you maybe were the players that you had to draft, basically? Like, who were the league winners? Who helped these teams get to the playoffs?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think a lot of people sort of brush this one off. and we'll just automatically say Jamar Chase, Saquon Barkley. But it's a really good question. I think this season sort of came down to a lot of head-to-head decisions at ADP. I think that people would like looking back on it, there was always like if you draft enough, whether it's underdog or FFPC or whatever format, and you're like a volume player, every few drafts you'd see somebody push Bijan up to the 101 as like the way to be contrarian. That proved to be like the move because he's been a better win rate guy than clearly McCaffrey, Tyreek Hill, and CeeDee Lamb. And actually, Lamb was by far the best pick you could have made there of the big three. So it came down to that. Then a lot of you go a little bit later in the first round, Jefferson versus Chase. Yeah. I had this Athletic article this year where it was Adam Ronis and I each taking a take on this. And Ronis picked Justin Jefferson over Chase, and I did this Chase over Jefferson. So that was good. But it was like Chase over Jefferson proved to be a 6-point difference almost per game.
Yeah.
And it's the biggest difference ever between the wide receiver 1 and the wide receiver 2, really like as far back as we can track. Now, somebody's going to get in the chat and be like, well, Theo, Jerry Rice this one year, outscored the wide receiver 2 by 8. No, I mean like relevant last 12, 15 years. So I think that's always interesting. Like short answer, Jamar Chase, anywhere in the middle of the first round, easy. And then there was a couple of leagues where during the holdout, he was falling into like that 109, 110 range. You didn't really see Jamar Chase at the 112, but you did see him at the 110 in those really late drafts. Those teams are obviously just like on fire, especially with the statistical difference. And then Saquon Barkley at the turn. Late in the season, it was Saquon versus Jonathan Taylor for a lot of people. Like that was the decision. So another massive win rate decision. So Saquon pick. But then I go a little bit further down the list, Jason. There was a couple players that sort of really, really stand out to me. Chase Brown was the one where, we talked about him. We were further ahead of him than multiple people at Player Profiler. Like there were some Chase Brown detractors out there. Let's put it like that. But Chase Brown's one where he's proven to be just this incredible pick at ADP. I think he's shaping up to be a really, really strong one. Devon Achane is a kind of a nuanced answer because you would have had to survive those really slow weeks, but he was proved to be statistically a very nice pick at ADP. Like statistically speaking, like you're talking about a guy who's been on fire in terms of the receptions.
Well, and you mentioned
Joe Burrow, and I'll say Joe Burrow too. Like I'll throw Joe Burrow. He doesn't get mentioned enough as like what an impactful player. Like you had these drafts where quarterback was pushed down. So by pushing quarterback down, it pushed like the slightly lower end QB1s down even further than they necessarily should have. So like Joe Burrow right now is challenging for QB2 overall. He's QB3 overall now. He could run hot and end up being like the QB2. But Joe Burrow, you were able to get him significantly lower than like the Jackson, Allen, Hurts tier. So he's a really interesting one. Bowers obviously was a really good win rate guy as well. So it's a really fun season when you look back at this.
Yeah, there are a lot. I think that you kind of hit the nail on the head. And you mentioned the head-to-heads even with Devon Achane. It was like Devon Achane versus Kyron too. Like it was every single round. There was a killer decision that if you chose the wrong one, it was over. If you decided to take Patrick Mahomes over Josh Allen, you lost by week 4. You probably stopped watching the NFL in general. It was over for you. So let's talk about that. Who were some of those league losers? I guess Patrick Mahomes is one of them to me. But what are some other guys?
Yeah, I mean, Mahomes is a really easy one. The guy has had like 2 QB1 performances I think it was a top 5 stat. It's like a staggeringly low stat for Mahomes. Like over the last 2 years, I think he has like 2 top 5 performances all over the 2-year period. Like he's just not doing it. He's turned into Tom Brady. Like for multiple years, we had Tom Brady as a guy where we're like, this is the best quarterback in football. He continually wins games, but he's a purgatory value for my fantasy team. And he ends up the season as like quarterback 10. Now, Brady went ahead and had that Tampa Bay run where he sort of flipped the script on that. And Mahomes absolutely could do that next year. Let's say Kansas City angles themselves and they pick up another strong wide receiver, the passing game turns around. Like maybe that could happen. Maybe a dynamic back they add through the draft, something like that. But at the end of the day, Mahomes was definitely one that did not deliver for you. Obviously, Tyreek Hill, a massively disappointing selection. Christian McCaffrey, you're dead in the water, dead on arrival, we should say, with McCaffrey. That was just a terrible pick. There was really multiple picks this year that didn't provide any impact. It was a weird year when you sort of look back at the counting stats with it. Yeah, I mean, there was multiple players in the tight end position were bad picks. Like Laporta was one where Laporta's sort of, I don't want to have like a huge negative Laporta stance sort of moving forward for the end of the season. I think he's set to have a pretty strong fantasy playoffs, stronger than his regular season. But this was a year where if you drafted Laporta, you took the tight end one overall. The tight end one overall cost you significantly less than in previous seasons, but it still completely sunk you because the opportunity cost of selecting Laporta was passing by on a potential Devon Achane, potentially Malik Neighbors. There was multiple players at like multiple positions that if you selected Laporta, you missed out on. So it was sort of a cascading effect. He was a terrible pick. There was a couple of picks that really, really sunk you. Usually we say when you draft a guy, like if you miss out on a particular round, you don't lose your draft because of it. But if you drafted Christian McCaffrey, that's a tough putt. Tyreek Hill, really, really tough putt. So this is a year. And also, Jason, one other thing that we didn't discuss was Bijan Robinson versus Breece Hall.
Yeah.
This was an art. Like I had a period of time on press coverage this summer, one of my shows here at Player Profiler, where I would ask each and every guest, and even Dynasty Life, I was asking these guests because it was so fascinating. These experts in fantasy football, really sharp people. And down the line, it was, would you prefer Breece Hall or Bijan Robinson this year at ADP if you had to pick one? Because everybody put them in a tier. But if you draft Bijan Robinson right now, you're feeling great about the next 3 weeks. And if you drafted Breece Hall, you feel like you're dead in the water. And Bijan outscored him for the season easily. So that like a lot of these head-to-head battles this year, it's a really fun one when you kind of galaxy brain it and look back on all this.
Yeah, no, I think that this was probably one of my favorite drafts years. Like, look, it was just like it was because Chris McCaffrey sunk you probably, but you were maybe able to get Jordan Mason. And then like with Sam Laporta, at least it was tight end. You might have been able to at the end of the draft got TJ Hawkinson, Cade Otton. Maybe you were bold and went for Brock Bowers too. But then, the whole opportunity cost, it was such a fun year, really, looking back at it. Because even the quarterbacks, like Josh Allen, he was like 3rd, 4th round in single QB.
I think that was one where every year we see the market adjust a position. Mm-hmm. And last year it was we had all these waiver wire hits at the quarterback spot. And plus you had all these, like Jordan Love finished as a QB5. Yeah. Multiple guys, like Dak Prescott was drafted as a QB2, finished inside the top Q4. And all that did was that pushed the ADP of quarterbacks down. So now you have a lot of teams who are sitting with an absurdly low exposure to Lamar Jackson, where they were able to get Lamar Jackson not necessarily cheap compared to the other quarterbacks, but cheap compared to every other position. Right. So this year definitely made a dent with that. A quarterback got pushed down. So obviously this year, you're going to see running back. To next year, you'll see running back get pushed up. That's sort of the natural progression from this year to next year. It's just being able to roll with the punches and spot value and not be able to sort of get sucked into the positional traps that are going to be created by ADP.
Yeah, for sure. Should be fun. I'm very excited. I do have one team somehow, Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow, Saquon, Derrick Henry, that pushed through on Underdog. So I'm very excited to see how that goes. Everyone cross your fingers for me because that's a pretty absurd top 4 right there.
Yeah. Underdog, it's all running back teams and Jamar Chase, and it's wild. Like I look through some of my underdog teams that are still cooking, and it's like some of these teams like are not the ones that you walked out of a draft with being like, oh, what a sharp draft that was. It was like a 5 running back build, and you had like Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley on the same team, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah. And hey, who would have thought? right?
Yeah.
Who would have thought? Although we had Derrick Henry very high heading into the year. We were recommending him at the top of the third, sometimes end of the second.
And I'll give Billy Muzio big props on that. He was well ahead of myself on where he had Derrick Henry.
Mhm.
I mean, I didn't have Derrick Henry like embarrassingly low or anything, but I certainly didn't have Derrick Henry inside the first round. Billy Muzio had him inside the first round. So big shout out to Billy on that one.
Yeah, shout out Billy. He's one of the best.
Yeah.
Now, I do want to ask you a personal question. And I know
Sure.
you're Theo, you're the GOAT, you're the OG. I'm sure you don't have a lot of bad teams out there. So give me a player that personally really affected you this year, whether it be that they made or broke one of your teams.
Oh, I mean, for this year, I would say Tyreek Hill is one that hurt me.
Okay.
Tyreek Hill, I did have some exposure to, and I entered into the season very, very excited about his situation. And if we look back at the end of last year, it was Tyreek Hill. If he didn't have that little tiny ding towards the end of the season, then he would have finished as a wide receiver 1 overall, not CeeDee Lamb. Plus, he was, going after that 2,000 receiving yards number. I was just into Tyreek Hill at value. I wasn't the only one. So I would say, some teams with Tyreek Hill, those were the ones that got me. But I was strongly like Bijan over Hall. I think that helped me on some teams.
Yeah.
I had some Jamar Chase exposure, and certainly, my dynasty teams right now are I'm set for like a very big dynasty season. This will be
Nice.
a very solid payday, hopefully by the end of the dynasty season for me. Redraft was a mixed bag this year. Like this was probably less profitable than it was the previous 2 years redraft wise. But for some reason, my dynasty is sort of going to make up for it. So hopefully it'll be all right. And I got a couple best ball tickets that are kicking too.
I mean,
Jason, they're still looking good.
Yeah. Any profit's nice, right? Like, come on, we pay to play. It's about the fun. It's about the money too.
Yeah, you got the profit's nice. The profit's nice.
The profit's nice. Yeah, I mean, I get that. Luckily for me, Tyreek Hill was the one player in the first round I avoided. I don't know why, actually. I didn't ever have any analysis for it. I was like, I just don't feel it, really. But otherwise, my guy that really broke me, and I feel like I'm in an abusive relationship with Kyle Pitts, Theo. I don't know what.
Let him go, Jason. It's over.
Can't do it.
Well, I mean, it's not necessarily over. But it's the idea of him being some big fantasy impact. It's multiple offensive coordinators are deciding to do the same thing. He's getting out targeted and out used by Ray McLeod. Mooney passed him by earlier in the year. I don't think this is one. I've seen these, some takes out there that like it took David Njoku all this time and all this stuff. I think that's the kind of stuff that can still get people in trouble.
Yeah.
Pitts is fine to have him on your dynasty team. Just lower your expectations down. And this happened with multiple tight ends this year. I mean, I think Kincaid was one where I was very enthusiastic about him. Some guys can't take that next step, Jason. It's just they don't do it. It's a tough league. This is a place where really, really good players fail to hit sometimes, and it happens every year. Let them go.
I can't do it. I can't do it. I can though. I like really. You can see. I showed the audience this week. In one of my guillotine leagues, I dropped him for a defense. I was like, I can't do it.
Yeah,
I'm done.
If scoring points didn't matter, he'd be a great guy to have on your roster.
Yeah, he's like a really sexy tight end to have on your bench. Like, if you're like, yeah, he's my tight end too. You feel great.
You feel okay. You feel okay.
You're right. Anyway, we'll move on to the stuff that you guys are here for, the playoffs. And if you are listening and you haven't made the playoffs, don't worry. We've got some advice for rebuilders too. Theo, I want to ask, we've got the league winners, but who are the true league winners, the championship winners? Who's got some matchups over the next few weeks? They're going to end the year on a tear and be on those winning teams.
Yeah, no, I mean, for me, this is all shaping up to Bengals exposure. Like, I think that everything's set up for the Bengals to deliver for fantasy managers. It's Joe Burrow, it's Chase Brown, it's Jamar Chase, and it's T. Higgins. It's incredibly consolidated. The Bengals have a solid schedule coming up as well. We talked about this week against Tennessee. I think that's sort of name your score type game for them. I think they really put it on. Then they get the Browns on the 22nd of December in Cincinnati. That game should fly over, be a really high scoring game unless we get bad weather. That's sort of the one X factor. And then the game that was sort of earmarked for the end of the season for week 17, Denver. This is an interesting one because I think it sort of shapes up. Patrick Surtain has had these shutdown numbers this year, and he's awesome, but he doesn't shadow as much as people think. Like, so we saw Jerry Jeudy have that huge game. Surtain was only covering him like 25% of the time, 20% of the time. He did most of his damage against other Denver corners. So Chase, Higgins, Chase Brown, Joe Burrow, those four guys are sort of shaping up to be really, really strong plays for the fantasy football playoffs. Those guys I love. I also think Bijan's going to have a really big playoffs. I think how do you protect Kirk Cousins is you give Bijan Robinson the football as much as possible. Bijan this week in Vegas, week 17, that game against Washington, in Washington, where that seems like it could be an over environment, and Bijan gets the ball 30 times. And then week 16 in Atlanta, they get Tommy DeVito and the Giants in a game that you think they're going to put it on. So I think it comes down to the Bengals, and I think it comes down to a lot of Bijan Robinson on championship rosters.
I'm with you there. I did a top 3 running backs to target, and number 1 was Bijan Robinson for me a couple weeks back. If you still had your trade deadline, like, go get that guy because those last 3 games are awesome.
And I'll say shout out to the chat. One comment I saw from Jeff Rogers, Jacoby Myers does have like this absurd schedule where you could see Jacoby Myers, like a lot of like what's going on with this, like the playoffs. We think about like last year, you get the absurd Amari Cooper game. Every single playoffs, you usually can circle a week where a wide receiver 2 gets like a 30-pointer. For whatever reason, it just happens this time of year. Jacoby Myers has that schedule, and he has this crazy usage. We have to think Ritter will be okay. So for me, Jacoby Myers is a good one. Malik Neighbors, I think, is also a sneaky one where he's been really quiet, but he has 23 targets over the last 2 weeks. Neighbors is at 80 receptions. So Neighbors is still right there, a chance to break Puka Nakua's record for, I guess him and Bowers could both pass Puka Nakua by, but it's absurd for Neighbors because Neighbors has only played 11 games and he has 80 receptions. He's got a shot too. So, there's a bunch of these players out there who could shape fantasy leagues this year. But for me, gosh, you got to love those Bengals, Jason. That's the easy layup answer.
And mentioning those Bengals, Jimbo has a good one in the chat too. Cortland Sutton, which back to Tyreek Hill, had a really good clip that'll come out this weekend. Shout out to the YouTube production team from the Dynasty Warzone. Cortland Sutton has more points than Tyreek Hill this year, which is just ridiculous. And if they're going to be playing the Bengals in the fantasy championship, that should be a shootout based on how the Bengals have been playing all year. So that's another fun one there, Jimbo. Thank you for that. And yeah, Charlene, of course. Josh Allen, what a stud. Now, we do have some breaking news. Evan Ingram is officially out for the season. Not just a 1-week absence, done with the torn labrum. Probably how it was going to go, even if it wasn't a torn labrum, with just Trevor Lawrence done for the season, Jaguars done for the season anyway. Brenton Strange, or just done?
Just done. Just start Brian Thomas and be excited about it.
Yeah.
Brian Thomas has had his 2 highest target totals in his last 2 games played. Brian Thomas, the guy who right now would fit, if the season ended, would be a wide receiver 1. Him and Malik Neighbors, which is less impactful than, previous seasons being a wide receiver 1, but it's still super significant for a rookie to hit that number. So Brian Thomas, no Evan Ingram, expect to see a ton of Brian Thomas, double-digit targets every week. And I love the Cortland Sutton call as well. Bo Nix and Sutton have been arguably like the best correlation play that nobody talks about.
Yeah.
For the last 8 games or so, that's been one you could completely lean on.
Yeah, it's been fun. I liked I always tried to take a rookie quarterback at the end. Not a ton. I mean, I have some Bo Nix. I've got some Drake May. I have a lot more JJ McCarthy. Should have. That one really stung, but that was a really easy one to get, especially if you were doing the Bengals stack, right? If you are doing the best ball thing, looking at week 17, you could get Joe Burrow, you could get Jamar Chase, you could get Chase Brown, and then you could also get Bo Nix, Cortland Sutton. right there at the end. It was really
Yeah.
a beautiful team you could have put together. Now, for our rebuilders out there, what are a couple players that you'd be looking to target if you could, or maybe even on the waiver wire, like, or just general rebuilding advice in general?
I mean, this time of year, it's sort of a does your league have a trade deadline? So
Right.
some of these like Wild West dynasty leagues, like a lot of people get very, very passionate about this. A lot of my leagues have trade deadlines because I play a lot of FFPC Dynasty. But I will say that this time of year, selling out to get extra second round picks when teams are desperate, and maybe something that would have netted you an early third a couple months ago, maybe you could squeeze a second. I'm also of the opinion that offering a player and a third, if you know it's going to be an early second, is sort of always the move. Not to get to like 2025 draft class discussion, but this is one that I think people are going to like. And I think that those second round picks are going to be more difficult for you to acquire. So if you're a rebuild team, try to make that push, try to get a few extra draft picks, try to get those second rounders, especially early second rounders this year. I think that could really, really pay off for you.
I think that's fantastic advice, and kind of leads into my next question, which was any quick tidbits on the 2025 rookies. And sounds like we have. It sounds like a solid class, but
no, it's so I think it's really an easy one. Last year was a quarterback class for you. You wanted to get a quarterback, and all of these guys look like they're going to hit. And the only two quarterbacks that haven't hit yet are two that haven't played in Penix and JJ McCarthy. So last year was a quarterback draft class. The year before, that was a really, really fun one. We talked about running back. We talked about tight end being transformative. This year, we're sort of back to that. This is if you want to just take a bird's eye view and take a step back, be prepared to go get running backs with this draft class, and be prepared to go get tight ends with this draft class. And then I'll say, personally, I'll be higher on Tet McMillan than some. I think in the grand scheme of Dynasty, I think there's going to be Tet McMillan discounts this year, sort of because of what happened with Marvin Harrison Jr. And I think that Tet McMillan will end up becoming a very strong redraft target of mine as well. I think he's really good. I think he's going to be somewhere along the lines of a twitchier Drake London. And he's big. He's going to end up with high draft capital. I think that he's the real deal. This is a guy where I wouldn't be surprised if we see him go right in that top 5 range, Jason. I think the New England Patriots are just sitting there in the top 5. That'll be a perfect pick for them to pair with Drake May. But end of the day, it's like I made a prediction with Matt on our bold prediction show a couple months ago that I thought Genty would be a Dallas Cowboy. Now that's started looking like that could be the case if he doesn't go before Dallas picks. So I think the running back class, because of Genty and because of the talent for a couple of guys behind him, I do think we'll see like 3 or 4 guys inside the top 35 picks in the draft, which is excessive, but I think that's sort of where we're at. Tight end, I think we'll get 2 top 25 picks, and I think we'll see several other tight ends go in the second round. But I do think that, I think 2 inside of the top 18, 20 picks at tight end sounds crazy, but I think we're heading that direction. We don't necessarily have a Brock Bowers, but we have like Tyler Warren, we have Colston Loveland, multiple players that I think people are going to really want to get exposure to on their dynasty rosters. So plenty of time to discuss that. Oh, and Shedeur Sanders, my QB1 easily.
Are you concerned about him going to the Shrine Bowl?
No, I think that I'm not concerned at all. I think Shedeur Sanders, people get more excited about. I think I've been a Cam Ward guy for months and months, like before he even got to Miami, but he's my QB2. Nothing concerns me really with Shedeur. I think Shedeur is a player who's got a lot of tools where I think he'll hit. I don't necessarily think he's got the ceiling that we saw from a guy like Jaden Daniels at all, but I do think that he's a guy that's going to be a long-term asset for you, especially in Superflex. Like, set it and forget it. Shedeur is going to be a successful NFL quarterback.
Nice. That sounds like a very exciting draft class. You're getting me excited for Green Bay. And then whatever is happening there. So you mentioned your bold prediction show. You and Matt, you do this together. You guys are giving the bold predictions every week, sometimes season long as well. I want to ask you, you got one hot take to give me. What would it be?
Oh, I didn't even have any real. Oh, I have a hot take. I have a good hot take. This week, Chuba Hubbard scores 30 points for the first time this season. And the Carolina Panthers beat the Dallas Cowboys by more than a touchdown, if that's your thing. Carolina, I think this is like the levee broke for Dallas. Dallas played that competitive game against Cincinnati. Now they go play against a Carolina team that took Kansas City to the wire. They played Philly really tough. Now they have a chance to get a big win against Dallas, and I think they're going to house them. I think they might win by 10. Dave Canales has his team playing better. Bryce Young is playing better football, but it really comes down to Chuba Hubbard. Also a great draft pick, Jason. We didn't even talk about him.
Yes, that might be. He might be like the league winner, to be honest.
Well, he's had multiple 20-point weeks, but he's been sort of handcuffed by the offense. But this week, I think Chuba Hubbard gets 2 rushing scores, catches a few passes, gets you 30 PPR points, but it's not even enough because your RB1 overall this week is the big dog. Derrick Henry comes out of the bye week and just puts it on. 3 rushing scores against the Giants, breaks Jamal Lewis's Ravens single season record this week.
I love it. Yeah, I actually called 200 rush yards from Derrick Henry yesterday. I'm feeling this week so hard. Like it is lining up perfectly for Derrick Henry just to go nuclear this week. Coming off the bye against the Giants, I literally don't think it gets better than that. So I like that call a lot. Theo, it has been an absolute delight having you on. From week 1 to now, the most important week of the season. Thank you so much for joining me as always and just doing such a great job over the season. So important here at Player Profiler, doing great content. Make sure you guys follow him on X, on Twitter at TheOGFantasy, and check out for his content on Player Profiler. Theo, give him your plugs.
You guys know where to find me. I'm everything here over at Player Profiler, and check out School of Scott, the podcast I'm doing with Scott Barrett every single week over on the Fantasy Points channel. And my article that drops in the Athletic every single late night tonight it'll drop. So I'm everywhere, Jason.
Mm-hmm. The man's on the Athletic now. Just crazy, man.
Congratulations. It's highbrow. It's highbrow content over there. It's New York Times, guys. Come on. It's like I'm super highbrow with no, I'm just joking. But yeah, we really appreciate all the support. If you want to support us at Player Profiler, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel and take a chance to subscribe to our podcast. It costs you nothing, but it helps us out a lot. So shout out to everybody in the chat. Hope everybody's in their playoffs and they're ready to rock this week. I hope not everybody got sunk by last night and we're ready to make some money and win some titles.
Yeah, should be great. Everyone, have a fantastic Friday, a wonderful weekend. Good luck in your playoffs and the rest of your season. I'll see you all Monday. Hit that like, hit that subscribe. Peace.
From the Podfather to you, I deeply appreciate you tuning in. And many ask, what can I do? What can I do to help support the hosts, the research they do, the production costs? Go to playerprofiler.com, Dynasty Deluxe, World Famous Draft Kit, Rankings, DFS Dominator, and of course, data analysis. Subscribe to any one of those, and you support all of us and take Player Profiler to the moon.